All right, I think we'll call it there. Let me get started. Okay, hi, hello everyone. Welcome to the Sophos MDR ThreatCast, the October edition. My name is Greg, security strategist here at Sophos, and what I'll be doing is taking us through who's actually going to be talking today. So, joining us this month, we have Jordan Honest, who'll be taking us through the general kind of threat landscape and what we've been seeing out there. We're going to have Morgan Dubusky take us through then kind of the observed threat activity we've been seeing in the MDR service itself. And then Pavlo Kulim's going to take us through the kind of a couple of really interesting threat hunts that have been taking place. I could even show you the agenda so you'd know what that's about. Then I'll, this time, rather than having some from XOps actually talk about some of the content, I'm going to take us through a quick review and then roll us into the most unwanted slide, the image that you get to share. And then we'll do a Q&A at the end. I'll just remove that. We'll be starting in a moment, ticker. All right. So as always, people kind of always ask, are we recording this? Will the recording be made available? Yes, absolutely. We are recording this. This will be posted to the community blog. So the Sophos MDR community page, we'll put the URL at the end of this. That usually gets uploaded within about 24 hours or so. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them. There's a Q&A panel you can see, I think, on the right of your screen. So by all means, go jump into there, ask a question as we go. What we'll do is if the question's really pertinent and I feel it's worth interjecting the current presenter, I'll jump in, ask them the question, and then we'll get into answer it. Otherwise, we'll be behind the scenes answering questions. I'm usually doing that like a ninja. And then at the end of the session, we might do some of the remaining questions or bring up the ones that have been answered as we've gone along. All right, that's enough of me. So let's pass over to Jordan Honest. If Jordan, you would like to come on stage, the threat landscape.
All right, hello and welcome everybody. Let's dive right into it. Okay, so starting off in vulnerability land, we are starting off with Fortinet's FortiManager vulnerability, the one making all the noise this month. This one is tracked as CVE 2024-47575, more commonly known as FortiJump. So what is this one? It is a missing authentication in FortiManager servers. What does that mean? Well, FortiManager server, this is a tool that is for, or this is a server that is for managing Fortinet devices. So all of your Fortinet SSL VPN appliances, firewalls, they all kind of get managed through FortiManager. What does missing authentication mean? Well, this allows an attacker to add a malicious device of their own into somebody else's Fortinet device pool managed by FortiManager, and then essentially take control of it without any authentication. Seeing as how this manages an awful lot of devices potentially, this can give the attackers quite a lot of power. So this one is given a CVSS base score of 9.8. This one was, there were rumblings about this one for a while, and then finally a CVE was assigned, and almost immediately this one was added to the CISA-KEV database, which means it is known exploited in the wild. That's because it had been exploited in the wild. Fortinet worked with Mandiant to investigate compromises from this vulnerability, and they found compromise activity actually stretching back as far as they could find back into July. So that's kind of concerning. It's worth noting that this one is, while it has been exploited in the wild, it's not mass exploited in the wild. This was the work of a single threat actor that was being selective in their targeting. So maybe more of maybe less of a concern, maybe not. One thing I do want to bring up, they were targeting MSPs, so managed service providers. If any of you on the call are managed service providers and you have port 541 exposed on your FortiManager, do take caution and investigate that very thoroughly. This is a concern. So this is the most pressing vulnerability that we saw this month. Moving right along. Okay, moving on to notable news. The threat actor and leaker of information known as USDOD on different underground forums has been arrested. So this came after authorities in Brazil arrested an individual named Luan BG on charges related to data theft. This is after this person's personal information was leaked online, actually by CrowdStrike. which is a bit of an odd move. Bit of background, this individual had been responsible for hacking, stealing database information from a number of large, very powerful organizations. The most notable one was InfraGard. This is a platform for law enforcement agencies in the United States, and this person ended up releasing information on about 80,000 U.S. police officers, which is sure to get some attention. National Public Data is another one that we brought to you a couple of months ago, I think in August. We've got some more information on following on from that. Also, Airbus, EPA, Brazilian Federal Police, notable since this person is a Brazilian citizen. So once this person would get this information from large organizations, this person would go and sell this information on places like raid forums and breach forums. It's interesting that after he was doxxed by CrowdStrike and law enforcement was apparently moving in, this person reached out to a news outlet and confessed and admitted to doing everything that they did and taking responsibility for their actions and confirming where they are in the world. This person had expressed interest in actually getting out of cybercrime prior to this, but hadn't quite gotten around to it by the time the law started to move in. So what does this all mean? Well, a major threat actor in the world of cybercrime is now arrested and off the streets and presumably won't be threatening anybody anytime soon. So call that a win, everyone. Moving right along, we're going to move into some more notable news. The U.S. Authorities have indicted 2 Sudanese individuals for operating a distributed denial of service as a service operation. So this was a group known as Anonymous Sudan. This is a group that had built a DDoSing platform that they called Godzilla, and basically accepted payment from anybody all over the world to DDoS whoever they got paid to DDoS. So they were reported to have conducted over 35,000 DDoS attacks with an estimated damage of over $10 million. One of the most notable events that came out of their campaigns, they attacked a health center, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. Their DDoS attack actually forced the emergency department to close, and incoming patients had to be rerouted to other facilities. That is a great way to get on the radar of law enforcement, and certainly that seems to be what's taken place. 2 Sudanese individuals have been indicted by the US. First, Ahmed, 22, faces charges that could result in life in prison. Apparently, his older brother, Allah, 27, faced charges that could result in up to 5 years in prison. Even though these individuals have been named and it's more difficult for them to travel internationally now with these charges, it's still unclear whether they're going to be extradited to the States to actually face charges. So interesting development, hopefully some more to come out of that. But one final note, US authorities did actually dismantle their DDoS botnet, Godzilla. I think that was back in February. So a couple wins that we've got going on this front. Moving right along, let's take a look at ransomware leak site analysis. We saw a couple different groups kind of on the upward trend. Sarcoma is one that I actually hadn't seen before. So it's interesting to see them make such a rise in the rankings, I guess, this month. 8base is an established player, not sophisticated, but they tend to get the job done. Not terribly surprising to see that they are on an upswing. Meow ransomware has been around for quite some time. They get on hot streaks and have upswings every once in a while. Falling Healin, I think is the pronunciation, had very few compromises and posts on their leak site this month. Cicada 3301, which had been on quite a tear recently, suddenly almost had no compromises this month and no posts. Trinity is another one that seemed to get really hot for a while and seems to have dropped off quite quickly. So moving on to kind of the heat map we've got here, I will tell you to take this with a pinch of salt. You see a very hot spot for Lockbit there. Take that with a grain of salt. The numbers were saying something about 80 or 90 posts on their leak site. When you actually visit their leak site, those posts aren't there. So I'm not sure exactly what's happening there, but take that data with a grain of salt. But also you see Ransom Hub had a consistent month. Play had a very consistent month. And across the board, it's tended to be a bit of a later month for posts to get seen. So that is more or less it for me. I'm going to be handing it off to Morgan here to take you through the observed threat activity.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Hey, everyone. Let's dive into the observed threat activity. So we're going to start off with the most active ransomware observed targeting the Sophos customer base in October. So same as last month, the number one ransomware family we observed was Fog ransomware. Fog first popped up in, I believe, May of 2024. We've first saw them in August of 2024, and since then have seen over a dozen Fog cases. They have become very prevalent and will probably continue that uptick in activity in the coming months. We've also seen a few Lockbit cases this month, which, as Jordan mentioned, has been a little bit weird on their data leak site. We have seen, I think, just a handful of cases attributed to Lockbit ransomware. We're unable to determine at this time if it was, samples from the leaked Lockbit builder or if it was the legitimate Lockbit affiliates themselves, but we do see them still kind of hanging around and launching attacks every now and then. Moving on, so a new data point that we included in this section is ransomware targeting by sector observed by Sophos in the last month. So as you can see in the last month, education, manufacturing, and finance were the top three sectors impacted by ransomware. Education can be anything from, tutoring centers to training centers, school districts, which is a little bit different from what you'll see, a couple lines down with just schools, which, is K through 12. So we are seeing education being very heavily targeted, at least in past months, which is not out of the ordinary, unfortunately, for the education sector across the board. But if you're interested in breakdowns of different things like targeting by region or most frequently seeing dual use tools, let us know and we'd be happy to cover those trends in future ThreatCasts. We're able to generate a good amount of trend graphics through our platform that we use called OpenCTI. So if you guys are interested in any certain things, feel free to shout them out because we do this for you guys and we're happy to share whatever information that you'd be interested in. All right, going into some specific case studies here. So in October, Sophos MDR uncovered a new security threat activity cluster, or STAC, which we call STAC 5881, that has been seen leveraging compromised credentials and a known Veeam vulnerability in attempted ransomware attacks. And in each of the observed cases in this stack, initial access was gained using compromised VPN gateways without multi-factor authentication enabled. Some of these VPNs were running completely unsupported software versions. Another commonality between the cases was the exploitation of the Veeam vulnerability called CVE 2024-40711, which is a critical unauthenticated remote code execution vulnerability in Veeam backup and replication that we discussed last month in the threat landscape section. So using this vulnerability, the attackers would create a local account called Point with the same unique password that they would then add that local account to the local administrators group and the remote desktop users groups. And we have seen these attack characteristics leading up to the attempted deployment of 3 different ransomware. So at first, we saw several Akira and Fog ransomware cases aligning with this stack. So as I mentioned, Fog ransomware was launched initially in May 2024, and they have become very well known for using compromised VPN credentials, specifically to target US educational organizations. And in the Fog ransomware cases that we've seen with STAC 5881, we saw the attacker deploy the ransomware to unprotected Hyper-V servers and then specifically use the utility rclone to exfiltrate data. So in a lot of these cases, we did unfortunately see attempts to exfiltrate data along with deploying ransomware. But in several of the cases, Sophos endpoint protection and MDR prevented ransomware deployment. And we're not sure exactly of the nature of this stack. We do think it's possible we're dealing with some sort of initial access broker that's gaining access to the organizations and then selling the access to various ransomware affiliates, but we do need more evidence to say this for sure. Arctic Wolf recently published research stating that Fog and Akira ransomware actors are increasingly compromising organizations through compromised SonicWall SSL VPN accounts. So specifically by exploiting a recent vulnerability, I think it's CVE 2024-40766 in SonicWall VPN that we talked about last month. So we're seeing quite a bit of overlap between these two ransomware, Fog and Akira, and specifically their initial access tactics. But most recently, we also saw this attack chain leading to the deployment of a previously unreported ransomware called Frag. Now, we do not know too much about this ransomware yet. It is not widely reported. If you were to type in Frag ransomware into Google right now, you probably won't find much on it. So we are keeping a close eye on it and assessing the connection between this new Frag ransomware and the other ransomware that we're seeing. And as we've probably mentioned in previous ThreatCasts, Akira ransomware is a more well-established ransomware player, but pretty recently they've had some data leak site website access problems. So it is interesting to see this group, Frag, showing up now, even though the Akira data leak site access is reported to be gradually returning online. Seeing Frag pop up now and having overlaps with Akira may hint to a connection between the two or possibly even a rebrand of the group. So we're keeping close tabs on that and the prevalence of this new ransomware that we're seeing. But the takeaways / advice here are all things that you've heard us repeatedly shout from the rooftops in past ThreatCasts. So patching known vulnerabilities. Both Fog and Akira are very well known to leverage newly disclosed CVEs. They're typically, I want to say they're the top two groups that typically jump on these types of recently disclosed CVEs, but they get on it really, really quickly. So they use these, recently disclosed vulnerabilities, not only for initial access, but also to escalate privileges and move laterally within compromised environments. And several of the VPNs compromised by this cluster specifically were running unsupported software versions. So it's really important to patch vulnerabilities as soon as possible and to update / replace out of support VPNs. Additionally, these ransomware actors heavily favor the use of compromised VPN credentials for both initial and persistent access. I cannot emphasize that enough. Compromised credentials are these guys' bread and butter. So that really does underscore the importance of using MFA to control remote access. And then moving on to our last case study that we're going to be talking about here. Sophos MDR has tracked what we believe with moderate confidence to be a Chinese cyber espionage campaign leveraging a new version of the ShadowCAD malware loader to target a foreign government. And as a little bit of background, ShadowCAD is a remote access Trojan malware that has been attributed to Chinese state-sponsored threat actors and is reported to be a successor to the very well-known PlugX malware. And in a recent case, we saw a ShadowCAD loader sample that matched one sample in a recent case reported by Cisco Talos that was attributed to the Chinese threat group APT41. However, the version that we observed included some new features, specifically features to avoid detection. So in our case, we identified an outdated and susceptible version of the Microsoft Office Input Method Editor executable. So I think it is imecmnt.exe, and this was being used as a ShadowCAD loader by using a Windows API call to load the malicious DLL. So it's a pretty a potentially interesting defensive measure is the Windows Administrator Protection. So, the threat actors have been observed leveraging the mklink command to generate a hard link between various accessibility executables and command.exe, which allows for privilege escalation after lateral movement by enabling RDP. And for this type of attack to be successful, the accessibility feature executable must not be present, or it must exist in some sort of renamed fashion, which would allow the attacker to generate an elevated command shell without triggering a 4624 authentication event. And Pablo is going to talk a little bit more in a second about this technique and the really awesome hunt done by our team to identify this type of abuse. So I'm not going to dive into it too much and I'll let him cover it. But Sophos first detected this shadow pad activity in May of this year, which was a month after endpoint protection was activated in this particular environment. And we've since observed almost monthly attempts by these threat actors to move laterally and collect credentials. But luckily, this activity has been blocked by Sophos. In terms of other attack characteristics, the threat actor was seen leveraging an off-the-shelf RMM tool called Mesh Central for C2, along with RDP, the RingQ malware obfuscation tool, and Impacket. And that wraps things up for observed threat activity. I will throw it over to my counterpart here to cover the threat hunting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Morgan. Hello, everyone. So as Morgan mentioned, both of the hunts that we're going to be talking about today are heavily rooted in the observed threat activities for this month. In this case, both around mklink as well as the Veeam vulnerability. We thought to use both the TTPs and the ISCs associated with those activities as our basis for the threat hunts, and especially when we're kind of formulating our hypotheses, as we found that there is a lot of value in utilizing some real world examples when we're doing threat hunting, as opposed to just delving into the theoreticals. So let's dive into that and see what we actually had for this month. We'll start off with the mklink one. In this case, as Morgan was talking, there was a connection between the shadowpad attack and usage of mklink to bypass some of the defensive measures on our customers' estates, as well as to elevate privileges through abuse of the accessibility tools. And I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into what mklink does, or makelink, and how it was actually used in this case, because it's an interesting technique and one that hasn't really been socialized much, at least out there in the industry and the social media. So what is mklink or makelink? Makelink is a utility. It's a tool in Windows which allows for directories and files to be linked together. We call them symbolic links. They can be hard or soft, but the underlying idea behind this is that whenever there's an application or a file that needs to be executed, it's tied to a specific location, a logical location, usually physical and logical, on the drive. Now, what mklink allows for is for that location, at least logical location, to be altered. It can either be made into a dynamic location or a virtualized location. Why would anybody want to do that? Well, let's say that you have, for example, portable drives that you would want to host a specific file, but you don't want, or a folder, but you don't want to necessarily change the configuration of a specific application, or go into registry and look at, where is registry looking into, where is Windows looking in registry to execute a program. So because those are usually hard ties to a location, mklink allows for that location to be changed dynamically into any other. So in this case, we actually have an example where a mklink in the first line is used to alter the location of a specific folder called my folder into user/user1/documents. So if you have, for example, a shortcut on your desktop, or you have a mapped drive, instead of looking into or tying it into my folder, actually opening the folder will take you into users/user1/documents. Same idea. It's memorized on the system itself as one location. However, logical execution of it is tied to a completely different location. Second line does the same thing, but for a file. So in this case, we're looking at myfile.file, but we're actually linking it to a completely different file. It could be the same, it could be different. We're kind of foreshadowing here what we're doing, but in this case, the file is called example.file and is in a completely different location. So you can kind of tell why this is important and how this could potentially be abused. In this case, what the attackers were doing is, and it's a little bit hard to see, so I'll kind of guide you through it. once the attackers actually had access to a machine. So this does preclude and does require access to a machine in order to circumvent the protections. In this case, the file magnify.exe, which is a magnifying glass, a utility accessibility tool by Windows, was removed from its original location. A hard link was created between magnify.exe and, lo and behold, cmd.exe. So what does that mean in theory? It's the same idea. Most of you will most likely remember the sticky keys type of attack of bypassing passwords, where if you press Shift 5 times, you will have the sticky keys prompt. But if you replace the sticky keys file itself, the executable, with something else, such as command line, command prompt, cmd.exe, pressing Shift 5 times will allow you to actually get command shell, and then you can execute your commands depending on the privilege level that you would have. In this case, a very similar type of attack. So the beginning and the end is kind of similar, but it's what's in the middle that has changed. And this is a technique, again, that we haven't really seen much used in the wild, where MK-Link, the actual link itself, was created between magnifying glass and command.exe, which allows for any time that you user or an attacker would utilize, for example, magnifying glass in Windows, they would have a command shell that they can then execute various different arbitrary code. Why would anybody want to do this? Well, I first mentioned that you would actually have to have access to the machine in order to do this. So what we are theorizing here is this is done as a redundancy or a backup access, almost like a backdoor into the system itself. So if your primary method of access through C2, through lateral movements, scheduled tasks, whatever other persistence mechanism you have is removed by a defender, this type of attack, this link is not something that defenders will most likely investigate. Therefore, you would actually have potentially another entryway into the system that you have already had access to before and resume whatever activities you were having before. So again, this is a real example, precluded by the shadow pad infection, and then led into this, creating this type of redundancy per persistent access, as well as a bypass of defensive measures, mostly because a lot of organizations will not have any detection mechanisms looking into this type of behavior. So really interesting attack, really interesting methodology, and we've kind of developed a hunt. And in this case, we're looking at a myriad of different tools that could accessibility tools that could be used in a similar manner. So we're looking at MK-Link, Make-Link, coupled with magnifying glass, the narrator, the display switches, the font increasers, virtual keyboards. Any one of those accessibility tools could potentially be susceptible to this type of attack. Really interesting from our side, and something that we definitely recommend hunting for in your own respective environments. Now, the second one is directly tied to the Veeam vulnerability. And I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm not going to do a super deep dive technical, because there's a lot going on when it comes to this specific vulnerability, but there was some really good research being done about a proof of concept as to how this can be abused, as well as I will discuss some of the techniques that we've used to hunt for this. So in this case, the Veeam backup service module was used to spawn a command line shell through a compromised account from VPN. So in this case, we've actually kind of pivoted from an already existing infection into what is now confirmed to be confirmed exploitation of a vulnerability of Veeam itself. So let's talk a little bit about what this vulnerability is and why it's being used and how it was being used. So in this case, the vulnerability itself allows for the unauthenticated remote code execution, pretty standard kind of boilerplate in terms of what the capabilities are. What is interesting about this and how it works is that Veeam itself is very heavily rooted in .NET. .NET architecture uses .NET, what we call serialization protocol, to handle a lot of the networking protocols and networking connections between either your actual backup sites and backup locations, as well as remote administration too. And the way that it works is by default, and it's kind of actually a pretty secure implementation. By default, it utilizes a block list. In this case, one thing to kind of caveat and note, the actual functions and modules within the code itself use the outdated nomenclature of whitelist and blacklist. So for the purposes of just kind of explaining what this is, I'm going to be referring to those, even though this kind of nomenclature is not really widely used anymore. But in this case, it's using a function called a blacklist to look at what is allowed and what is not allowed. it uses the whitelist lookup. So the actual whitelist lookup has only a list of allowed devices, systems, endpoints, networking locations that can modify, configure, and have access to the actual Veeam backup services, the backup servers themselves. So it defaults to what they call a whitelist, and therefore nothing beyond what is already defined can access it. The POC that was done by the researchers is an interesting one because they actually tried to look for object classes that don't default to whitelist, but are part of the same .NET stack, which means that if you can somehow touch another object, another function itself within the code that doesn't default to whitelist, it actually defaults to blacklist function, then that would mean that you can actually bypass the what is allowed block of networking addresses to gain access to the actual configuration systems and files, and actually have command shell that you can kind of launch as a springboard to all of your other attacks. This table here itself has a number of versions that are affected by the vulnerability itself, where it's been patched, and there were some other patches being done by the Veeam team as part of this. And I'm not going to go into detail on that. This is just for your information to kind of understand what versions are considered to be quote unquote safe and which ones were impacted by this specific vulnerability exploitation. How does that tie to what we've done as a threat hunting team? Well, we wanted to look at anomalous relationships between Veeam backup server and service as a process, as a parent process, and what child process it spawns. Now, what does this mean? I mean, in this case, we actually have a confirmed example of what it looks like, at least in the bottom one. The top one is a screenshot from the researchers that actually showcase how it's being done. But we do have confirmation, but the way that we kind of came across it is an interesting one because there seems to be a trend nowadays to kind of shy away from IOCs, those atomic kind of indicators of like IP addresses and domain names, because we feel that they're kind of low effort. They're usually burnt before you can even get to it. They're not, a lot of teams now focus on TTPs and not so much on the IOCs. In this case, it was the IOCs that led us to find successful exploitation of Veeam servers. It was part of another IR, another attack. We had known compromised VPN IPs. Once we plugged in those VPN IPs into the rest of the environment to see what else it was doing, we saw them touching Veeam servers, and that led us to actually kind of connect the dots and find a successful exploitation. So this is just kind of like a FYI. Do not ignore IOCs, especially when they're tied to like an ongoing attack and an ongoing incident, because more often than not, that could be the springboard for more threat hunting and finding additional infections as well. So in this case, we had to do a lot of anomaly-based searching. We had to do a lot of baselining because, as you can imagine, Veeam Backup Service is a module that is heavy because it is rooted in .NET. It relies a lot on BASIC, and that itself spawns a ton of child processes that we kind of had to sift through and find what is anomalous, what is considered to be malicious as opposed to benign. So just to give you an idea of what we started off with and where we ended up with, this was a basic search query for the estate just to see what the Veeam backup service.exe file was doing as a parent process. And very quickly, we realized that the vbc.exe as a child is spawning a ton of stuff that is completely normal and completely benign. And we had to kind of sift through it and find and cluster a lot of data, sequences of events to just figure out whether it's associated with the actual exploitation event or not. And then finally, what we ended up with is 35 filters, 35 distinct lines that have very, I don't want to say advanced logic, but logic that is rooted in Boolean expressions to figure out what is considered to be anomalous and what is considered to be benign, what is Veeam doing that is normal and part of its operation, and what is Veeam potentially being interacted with that will be considered to be a threat and a confirmed anomaly. So in this case, we ended up finding 4 confirmed customers that have had confirmed Veeam exploitation events beyond the one that we already saw as kind of the springboard event that we used to actually kick off the hunting. So overall, a very successful hunt. And we do recommend in this case, both understanding and baselining your own environment when it comes to Veeam and any other really application that is susceptible to this type of exploitation. And then based on that, really understanding how it works, what is considered to be anomalous and what is considered to be benign, and kind of continuously building out that baseline, because once you do it regularly, it's much easier to kind of sift through a lot of that noise. So that's all for me. Thank you very much. And I'll kick it off back to Greg for some final thoughts.
Fantastic. I mean, Pablo, that was just awesome. There's some questions. What I'll do is I'll bring them up because I mean, my section is going to be very short, and then we'll get to Q&A. So this month, for the XOP review, there's a number of really interesting bits of content that was posted by the XOP team. The first piece was there's political manipulation with massive AI model-driven misinformation and micro-targeting. This piece is okay, so you've probably all heard about the use of like large language models and AI and like misinformation campaigns and use to like political targeting and so on. So our AI team basically did a really cool bit of research into could you actually micro-target individuals using like social media kind of profiles to effectively dynamically create a misinformation page with misinformation that was tailored to that individual based on their profile. Thus, rather than like a big widespread misinformation campaign where there's lots of stuff that not everyone's going to agree with, only show the misinformation that is actually going to be highly likely to be believed by the person you're profiling. So, super scary. And a really interesting piece. And if you've got, it's often talked as a hypothetical. This is a really cool piece if you actually want to look at, real research into this and how this is a true risk and how it could be done with, technology today. The next piece, really standard, right? October's Patch Tuesday from Microsoft on the ton of CVs that came out from Windows. I think it was only like 2 or 3 crits, but do take a peep at that one as always. I mean, just patch, right? You should be patching regardless. But there's a good insight into the various vulns that came out there. The third piece is actually the one I'll talk about for the most unwanted, is touching on something called kishing or quishing. I think it's quishing, right? So let me try that again. What is quishing? So it's effectively using QR codes as part of a phish. I think a lot of us are getting pretty used to looking at emails and seeing dodgy looking links and like mousing over the URL and seeing that it's going to take you to, when that pop-up pops up showing it's going to take you to somewhere a bit sketchy. And so what they're doing here is they're like embedding in like an email. Threat actors are putting like a PDF, and in that PDF it'll say you've received a secure document. Scan this QR code. Sort of inviting them to take their mobile phone out, use the camera. In which, to be honest, it's often quite hard to see the full URL because of the kind of like you're holding it in portrait mode of your phone. So often when you scan it, you can't really see the full URL. And when you tap it, it's going to then take you to like a really convincing phish page that's going to ask for like credentials to log into like Microsoft or something like that. And at a point, of course, they steal your creds. Cool piece. I'll talk about that as in most wanted because that's going to be the most unwanted piece this month. And then the final piece is just about Sophos AI. They've been at a really big industry sort of conference around this, and they gave a talk on a bunch of papers that they published, looking at the efficacy of using large language models to sort of train smaller, more traditional ML models, and in that conjunction build really effective sort of models against stuff. So as people are using LLMs to create all sorts of scary malicious content, being able to then utilize a lot smaller models derived from large language models to then give you really strong security against those. So a really cool piece, and I think that talk was on like the 24th. I actually haven't caught up with anyone on the AI team, but I hope that went really well because it's an interesting bunch of papers. All right, so most unwanted, and if this is the first time you've joined us and seen this, the most unwanted infographic is effectively an image that we upload to the Sophos MDR community page, along with the recording of this and so on. And it's an image that's designed for you to be able to share that with your end users to get them informed on, topics that are going on out there. I think previously someone asked me also to share the body text of that, so I'll make sure that's shared into the post so that if you want to translate it or reuse that content. But yeah, what I decided to do is talk about quishing because this is sort of new and emerging, and I thought was very interesting, especially since our labs team have been observing this using quite a few campaigns. So it just kind of goes into what is quishing, what are these QR phishing codes, how they're being utilized. And I've put an example of a QR code there. I'm sure many of you might jump to go and take a quick scan of it. That's going to take you straight to that to the quishing news article that you saw on the previous slide. So yeah, we'll get that onto the community and upload it shortly. But with that, we kind of bounce into Q&A. So I can see there's a number of questions that have come through this time. Let me quickly just scan over some of the latest ones. And then what I'll do is I'll go back because I think I've already told people behind the scenes that we'll answer these live. So the first question was really good. They said, we no longer use Sonic Wall for a firewall and I assume for routing and connections, but they do still use their spam filter appliance. Is there any report of this being compromised like their firewalls? Now I'm not a subject matter expert on SonicWall products. I've genuinely never touched one myself. I decided to go look in OpenCVE, which is a kind of open platform for looking at vulnerabilities. It's one we've talked about previously, and because it's open source and free open source software, I think it's okay for me to talk about. And I can see there's a number of vulnerabilities, but I think at the end of the day, an appliance, any kind of security appliance, be it virtual, physical, is usually running like an operating system underneath it. And that operating system is probably based on Linux or Unix and is going to have fundamental vulnerabilities inside of it. Whether or not it's a vulnerability in the application, there's always going to be vulns popping up and how those could get exploited. Of course, as this is also an edge device, it's going to be receiving things from the internet, receiving sort of malicious emails and so on. And I did spot in a vuln in one of those things posted on OpenCVE that they did have something which is like a cross-site scripting attack. It was the first one I stumbled on, but there was some vulnerability very specific to that product. So I guess the kind of common thing is anything that's facing the edge, anything that's taking in untrusted content, right? Emails, you don't inherently trust everything. It's not an internal email solution. It's something that's facing the internet and taking things inbound. You need to secure that as if it's anything else that's facing the internet and is exposed to this kind of risks. There could be fundamental, flaws in the service that is receiving emails, and that could potentially have a vulnerability where, as it processes an email, it could get abused. But there could be various other things like admin interfaces and so on. So yeah, use something like OpenCVE, use a solution to track the risks that you've got. I mean, our team, we also now have something called managed risk, where we actually do external attack surface monitoring and actually probe our customers, various public IPs and what's they're sort of serving out there as an additional service. But again, these things to start sort of revealing those things. So yeah, let me jump on to the next one. Someone asked them what was the difference between a hard and a soft link when that was being asked in regards to MK Link that Pavla and Morgan were talking about. So MK Link is a sort of a utility to create a link. But what is a link? I might start using sort of Windows terms as well to make it a bit easier to understand. But when we're making a link, it's like a shortcut if you've used Windows before. So shortcut, it's a kind of a file that will then, when you access it, will redirect you to somewhere else. But in Linux and Unix worlds, you have a kind of a concept of links that's a bit different from Windows. A shortcut is just a shortcut. You can delete it. It's just a shortcut you're deleting. You're not deleting the file that it's linking to. But in Linux and sort of Unix world, you can choose to make either a hard link or a soft link. A soft link is very similar to the shortcut kind of terminology in Windows. It's just a link that it's a separate file that when you click it, it will link you to wherever it was meant to be taking you, be it an application or a folder. But if you delete that link, the soft link, you don't do anything to that, whatever it is it's pointing or linking to. So soft link is just a reference to somewhere, but that reference itself can be deleted and it's not going to destroy anything. You're not going to damage or interact with the original file. A hard link, however, in Linux and Unix world, is effectively when that when that file sort of linking to something else, if you delete the hard link itself, you're going to delete whatever it was pointing at as well. There's like a direct relationship between those two things. So that's kind of what those are, hard links and soft links. Another question we had was around what's the best way to handle phishing, and when new email campaigns that are hiding links, either in it like embedded or they're on third-party websites and so on, is Sophos email solution effective on these new attacks? Now, sort of links and emails and these kind of phishes, there's multiple places, right? Firstly, if it's an email, well then yeah, there's going to be possibly something in the email itself. Now, it could be a URL in the body of the email. It could be an attachment. It could be a QR code that's in the attachment. And so you have to take a kind of multi-layered approach to securing something like this. So the first thing is, so like, for instance, our email solution has something called time of click protection. Let me make sure I'm getting the right terminology here. Yeah, so we have a thing called time of click protection inside email. And what that means is when an email comes in, it's got a URL in it. Rather than that URL actually being the original URL, it's rewritten by the email security solution. And what that means is when your user receives the email, they're going to get a hyperlink that points to our technology, our platform. And so when they click it, then it routes them to our platform, which will then do a bunch of, at that time, in that moment of time, sort of analyses on the destination. And then if it seems safe, it will then allow them to pass on. So it's this kind of URL rewriting in emails, and it kind of gives you a layer of protection against something in an email. However, sometimes the user's going to click something, it's going to take them to a page that might itself not, be obviously malicious. It could be something else. So then you need additional layers of protection, right? So for instance, on endpoint protection, if you've got an endpoint product, there is the web, there's like, what's the terminology? Let me scroll down here. There is, I can't find its name. There's like a web threat. Is it real-time, part of real-time? Yeah, real-time scanning internet. And so you can sort of do like blocking access to malicious websites. You can do scanning of files as they're taking place, or if a file is at the destination. There's additional layers there. But you can also do one other thing, which is using something like web control in our endpoint to set up some kind of web sort of filtering based on categorization. Now, those categories, of course, you can go and sort of clearly removable, say don't block anything that's malicious. But you can also go down to some of the categories. My personal favorite is newly registered websites. So it's a category that you pick in web control or in the Sophos firewall, and you say, okay, if the user's trying to go to a domain that's just been registered, don't let them go to that. Why would a user need to go to a brand new website? That might cause you some problems. You might need to investigate it before you deploy it. But it's again another layer of protection of a threat actor has gone and spun up a new website just for this campaign, and it's probably only been around a short space of time. You can also go and use the none category and block those, which that means if we've not seen that website before, it's not prevalent, then just block it because it doesn't have a category. If it's not, chat or shopping or politics or something like that, you can just say, well, if Sophos hasn't given it a category, block it. So that's another thing you can do. But again, of course, you've got the endpoint products, blocking things on the endpoint as well, any kind of malicious behaviors. You've just got to do it at every single stage. It's not just about email, it's about everything else. We had the questions around the recording, as I expected. Yes, so if you are interested in seeing the recording of this, you can see the URL on the page, community.sophos.com/MDR-community-channel. On that page, once you've logged in, at the top is MDR ThreatCasts and uploads. Go into there, you'll see all the posts, and that's where we put the kind of the show notes and the most unwanted infographic, the links and everything like that. Let's see. Now there's a ton that have come in while I've been talking. My goodness. How can we secure shared mailboxes with Sophos? Now, that's I'm not 100% certain on what we can do about shared mailboxes. I'm sure there is something, but I'm sadly not. We've got quite a wide number of products now, and being an MDR, I'm very much quite focused on what we do here in the service. What I might recommend, though, is if you have got any questions around securing shared mailboxes, reach out to your Sophos account manager. We've got a bunch of Sophos solution experts that work with those teams that can then take you through that conversation and find you the right thing. Alternatively, you can reach out to the customer success team. If you're an MDR customer, of course, they can probably signpost you in the right place, get the right people to you so you can have that conversation. Someone asking about where I could access the Sophos community. You can see the link on the page right there. Let's see. We've got a question which is, can anyone comment on the macOS device protection updates failing errors happening in multi-states in Sophos? Yeah, I believe there was an error with one of the latest updates in the macOS client, which caused some updates to fail. I believe a fix has been put out. Let me quickly see if I can find if I just do Sophos macOS update failed and use a good old general search engine that we all know. I think there should be something quite new. There was certainly a page. I think something went on the support page, which I can see here on the support pages. But yeah, what I'll do, let me see if I can find a link, or if one of my colleagues can have a look for the link for that. Let's drop that into the chat if we can. If not, what we'll do is we'll put a link to it in the community blog. So if you go to the MDR community, what we'll do is we'll also then put that thing about the macOS updating. I believe it's already been addressed. I think there's already an update and a fix out there, but the minor details are not 100% certain on. So we'll just get that link put in the community post. We had someone say something very nice. So thank you very much for being so polite. It's a pleasure to do this, and I hope you've seen a lot of value out of this, and hopefully we'll see you next time. What else have we got here? We have Intercept X for mobile on our mobile endpoints. Does the QR code scanner in Intercept X for mobile vet QR codes scanned via Intercept X for mobile? Gosh, that was quite a tough sentence to say. I'm going to say that in a simpler way. we've got a mobile product called Intercept X. You can find it in the app stores for, I think, iOS and Android. And in that is a feature to scan QR codes. Yes, that is designed to scan and analyze what those QR codes before letting someone click them. So yeah, it's a fantastic additional layer of security. I probably should have brought that up for the quishing thing. But yeah, so if you're concerned about that, you can train your users to use Intercept X on their phones. So rather than using their camera to scan a QR code, use the Intercept X app. And then when that scans it, it will then go through the lab's, infrastructure, any intel that we have on that destination URL. We'll give an additional layer of protection there. Personally, I do think, if you've got QR codes, be a bit sort of skeptical in general, especially if it's not coming from someone that you know. In general, it's one of those things. It's a very weird thing to be clicking on. You could use them to QR codes have got lots of weird specs in there. I've seen them used for joining Wi-Fi, for telephone numbers, to send emails. So yeah, in general, I would say in a business context, if you really have a QR code, try and avoid it. If you must use it, use the Intercept X for mobile. Yeah, I think that's a good answer. There's another question here, which is, are there any phishing attacks available in Sophos phish threat? Wow, it's a really good question. I was having a discussion around phish threats a couple of days ago, actually. It's been a while since I've looked at that solution. So for people who don't know, Sophos has a product called Sophos Phish Threat. It's a phishing simulation or a phishing attack simulation platform that also then has some sort of built-in training. So if people fail the phish, you can get them some training. Really good thing to be doing for your own organizations if you're concerned around users not really knowing what a phish is. And it's a great way to let users fail safely, right? We can train everyone over and over and over again, but often the best way to learn is by real world experience. And so this is a nice safe way for them to fail in a real world scenario. They immediately then get enrolled in some training and educated on what just went wrong. I don't know if we've got a phishing attack in there, but it wouldn't be very hard to set one up, because you can set up your own templates in there. All you need to do is just stick a QR code in there, and I think you just stick that QR code at the destination. There are various ones that have like a URL in the phish training thing that points you to the failure page where they, by going on the wrong link. So you would just generate a QR code for that and then stick that in your phishing template, and then away you go. That would make sense. And let me see if there's anything else in here. Has anything else come in? Gosh, lots and lots. This is a very busy month. Let's see. Are you able to sync Sophos with Microsoft Defender portal to set up a scene to view data via Office 365 admin? I'm not 100% I understand the question there. Let me try it one more time. Are you able to sync Sophos with Microsoft Defender portal to set up a scene to view data via O365 admin? I assume you're trying to talk about whether you can take our data and put that into Microsoft. If that's the case, I believe so. If you go to, I think it's developer.sophos.com. Let me just check. developer.sophos.com. Let's see if that works. Give me a sec to confirm. Yes, if you go to developer.sophos.com or just search Sophos Central APIs, we've got a whole number of APIs for our platform and various ways that you can then, use those to either take data in, put data in, to take data out, to automate things, to integrate it into other stuff. So yeah, if there's you've got like a scene where you want to get those events out, there's various APIs you can poll and then get that data and put it into somewhere. Yeah. I think I'm going to take one more because we're coming up to time. So let me have a look. I might take two because there's two here. The first one is, should we implement web control on Sophos endpoints or content filtering via Sophos firewall, or both? What's the recommendation? Now, I'm not 100% certain on the recommendation in terms of should you do it on both. I think you can sync the policies between the two so they're the same. But I do believe the agents work together in conjunction anyway, because there's a bunch of stuff that we can do with the endpoints to do, inspection of HTTPS packets, and decrypt them on the fly on the endpoints and actually understand what it is. And so, for instance, a lot of the time on an endpoint, it's going to send, let's say you've got a piece of software and that software is talking, to the internet, but the firewall is just going to see that endpoint communicating. So we implemented a bunch of stuff that lets our endpoint agent actually communicate with the firewall and tell it what piece of software was generating the traffic. So I think it's available in both places. I sadly would have to say probably just check documentation or speak with the account manager. But what I'll also do, let me take a note for this question, and I will then try and put that into the MDR community post afterwards. And then I said I'll do one more. So is it possible to add the casino industry to the data sets? As someone who works in this industry, there have been several big compromises, including the Caesars and MGM attacks. Yeah, I remember those. Those were awful. as well as several other smaller chains. It would be nice to see how the sector is being affected. I'm not sure what our presence is in that industry, but I guess the Intel team behind the scenes, if you're still backstage, you can hear me. Yeah, Morgan and Jordan and co, if we've got anything on the casino industry, maybe we look into that in future months, or if you know anything right now, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, we do track the casinos in general under the realm of the entertainment industry. So I'd be happy to include some little tidbits in the next ThreatCast about that and the targeting against the casinos.
Yeah, that'd be fab. Thanks, Morgan. All right. Okay. I think we've definitely come to time. So I just want to say again, as always, thank you so much for joining us. A little shameless self-plug. We have the MDR Threat Brief. So in those weeks in between ThreatCasts, we also publish a weekly blog article on the MDR community. It's called the Threat Brief. You can find it in the announcements section. If you also see there's a subscribe button, you can get notifications to your inbox that we've done them. And this is just sort of covering what's been going on in the week, what ransomware actors are up to, what vulnerabilities have been coming out, put together by our intelligence team. I post it, but it's mostly just because I've got the admin rights on the community. But do check that out. Fantastic resource and a great thing to sort of see in the sort of the weeks in between the ThreatCast. And then, of course, there's all this further reading. These are all the links from the various content that we've shown today. Don't panic. This will all be posted on the community channel. You can see the URL on the top right. So make sure you jump there and grab that. But ultimately, I think that we'll call it to an end. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for taking a vested interest in what's going on out there in the cybersecurity world. As always, this kind of knowledge sharing and staying on top of things is so potent to us being able to really tackle and stay ahead of threat actors. It just means a lot that you really care to turn up, and feel free to drag in more of your colleagues and so on. If you've got questions that you want to talk about generic things, feel free to sort of fire them in. We're always happy to bring things in. So like the following month, as we're doing, this time we've got some takeaways. This is for you. We hope this can be a really useful resource for you. But until next time, thanks again. Hopefully see you next month. Stay vigilant, stay watchful, stay suspicious. If you have any concerns, please do reach out to the MDR operations team at the earliest point. All right. Thanks so much. You take care.